The Healthy Farm Index has been an ongoing project for approximately 8 years. There's multiple articles available to read about the tool broadly, but in particular, the motivation for the tool emerged from this interest in how do we balance biodiversity conservation on farms with the necessity that farms maintain viable crop production. These articles are available on the website or upon request. More recently, we've published a user-friendly version of the guide through the University of Nebraska Extension. This NEB guide goes through and talks about the specific indicators, why it might be useful on the farm, and it has a PDF at the end that you could use as a form to fill out the Healthy Farm Index. More particular, what we want to share today is the Healthy Farm Index web version. This is an online interactive tool that can be used to walk you through the Healthy Farm Index, what it is, why it's valuable. The link is available on the Organic Center. The Healthy Farm Index, though, fits into this broad array of different farm assessment tools, including assessment tools that focus on soil conservation, water conservation, profit, and other aspects of a farm. What we noticed in our review of this, though, was that biodiversity and ecosystem services were something that were lacking in terms of farm assessment tools. These existing assessment tools include the Soil and Water Assessment Tool, the Stewardship Index, a monitoring toolbox from the Land Stewardship Projects, and these tools all provide direct value to the farmers. But like we said, they lacked specificity for biodiversity and ecosystem services, so we saw a gap in this kind of array of what tools were available to farmers. There are assessment tools that do focus on biodiversity and ecosystem services. However, they are typically targeted at a larger scale than the individual landowner. So the Natural Capital Project is typically a regional, has their INVEST program, which focuses on regional change. And Iowa State has their watershed scale management tool, which has some similarities, but is a larger scale tool for monitoring change in biodiversity and ecosystem services. So the Healthy Farm Index fills this niche in assessment tools for farms that we felt was needed. In particular, it focuses on the farm scale. We thought this is important because this is the unit of land that an individual has direct control over. They get to make most of the decisions on their property. And so ultimately, it's a unit that is very functional for monitoring and planning. The Healthy Farm Index focuses on biodiversity. In particular, this focus on what should farms maintain. So can farmers and farmland contribute to regional biodiversity conservation? We tend to think of this as agriculture for biodiversity. And then the complementary part to this is how can biodiversity benefit agriculture? So this is the concept of ecosystem services, which are the benefits that society receives from nature. So what processes should a farm provide both to the farm itself, but then to the larger ecosystem and other communities? In terms of what is biodiversity, biodiversity can be broken down into different components. For the terms of the Healthy Farm Index, we focus on genetic, species, and ecosystem diversity. Genetic diversity is essential for designing new varieties of crops that can withstand drought tolerance, that maybe are resistant to different outbreaks from fungus. So at the top, we see some wheat breeding trials from some of our organic research in Nebraska. And the banana is kind of the classic example of a species that is threatened because of the lack of genetic diversity. The bar plot on the other side of the opposite the banana demonstrates the potential economic value of genetic diversity. So this is how much is it worth? And The reason including this figure here is we see that genetic resources are among the most valuable provisioning or services that provide direct benefits to society. Genetic resources are shown in the blue bar, and you can see that it is 3 to 4 times greater than the value of food production alone. Species diversity is the next scale up, and on the Healthy Farm Index, we consider both planned and associated biodiversity. So planned biodiversity is the diversity that a farmer deliberately chooses to put. What they plant, do they include windbreaks? How do they manage that land? We also include associated biodiversity. In our case, we focus on birds, plants, and pollinators. And so these can include songbirds, it can include bees, it can include wildflowers. But these are things that typically a farmer doesn't deliberately plant or manage for, but are influenced by the farm scale choices. And then we consider ecosystem diversity. Farmland is one of the most ecologically diverse land use patterns. We tend to think of it as a homogeneous landscape, but the reality is if you look both within a region but globally, you see lots of different land use and ecosystem types when we kind of scale up and look at the farm as a whole. Here we see 6 different agroecosystem types, everything from Minnesota in the top left to Bolivia in the bottom left and Germany in the top right. With the Healthy Farm Index, we want to try and capture some of this complexity so that it can be shared and communicated. Biodiversity and ecosystem services go hand in hand. And so ecosystem services we talked about are these benefits that we get from society. Ecosystem services flow from planned biodiversity and associated biodiversity. Planned biodiversity, again, we mentioned, are the things that farmers, the deliberate choices you might make. So did I include livestock in my operation? How many crops did I plant? Did I include cover crops? And associated biodiversity, the bees, the plants, the pollinators, the birds that arrive or choose to use the farm depending on how the landscape is managed. And both of these ultimately come back to the decisions made by the farmer. And so you can think of agroecosystem management. Are those daily choices or weekly choices or annual choices as to what should I do with my farm? Importantly, they create conditions that promote biodiversity, both planned and associated, which ultimately provides the ecosystem services to us. We haven't specifically mentioned what ecosystem services are beyond the benefits we receive from nature. Ecosystem services are broad. Some are global in scale, like climate regulation, and some are more local, like cultural or pollination. But importantly, these are benefits that farms, individuals, cities receive from nature, from biodiversity at no cost. The estimated global value of ecosystem services is approximately $125 trillion, which approaches more than double global GDP. If we look more specifically at agricultural ecosystems and ecosystem services, we can see how ecosystem services get broken down into supporting services, which kind of underlie and support ecosystems, regulating services, which regulate different patterns or regulate ecosystem function on the farm. So this can be everything from retaining soil, water purification. These are benefits provided to the farm, and you can imagine trying to manage those to enhance the profitability of your land, enhance the sustainability. You can also think of ecosystem services as something coming from an agricultural ecosystem. So if we look on the right side of the figure here, this includes food and fiber production, which are kind of the classic outputs that are part of a farm. But there's also non-market services. So again, we can focus on soil conservation, which we'll come back to a little bit later, wildlife habitat, the beauty of many farmlands. And also this figure is important because it does acknowledge that there are disservices provided both to and from farms depending on how they're managed. So nature is complex. There is damage from pests, there's competition. But we also know that farms do create habitat loss and disrupt ecosystem function. So it's not I think it's good to find that balance, but the Healthy Farm Index allows us to really focus on, um, these benefits to the farm, but then also these other non-market services that often get lost in monitoring or planning and communicating what farms do well.